right here in the state of Florida, defeated Amendment 4, protecting the lives of women and children around this great country. He's an amazing man, a fearless leader, and I'm so glad he's going to be here this morning. Would you please join me in welcoming first my colleague Ryan Bangert, and then the governor of the great state of Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis. Please stand.
Welcome to the free state of Florida. For those of you who aren't here, happy to have you. We made sure it was nice and warm for you when you came.
Well, Governor, thank you so much for being here. It is truly a privilege and an honor to host you at our conference again. We've had you here before, and it is just always such a special treat for us and for our audience to welcome you to ADF. You're just been such a part of our family and our community, and it's just such a privilege to have you.
Well, you guys actually accomplish things, and most of what happens on the right is grifting, and they don't actually do anything. And so when I see groups that are making an impact, you know, I wanna offer my support and do that. And I think that the ADF's had really major impacts on all these issues that so many of us care about. So you know, I'm a fan. I appreciate what you guys have done, and I know there's a lot more to do.
And talking about getting things done, Amendment 4. So 2024, a year ago, I mean, we have a raft of pro-abortion ballot initiatives on the ballot. They're passing one after another. And then here in Florida, the pro-abortion forces put Amendment 4 on the ballot. It has to pass by 60%. Stetson polling shows us passing with 64%. I mean, it looks pretty grim. And into that situation, you made a decision to step up and take this on personally. And I just want to ask you, why did you find that to be so important? What was so important about taking this on that you personally took ownership of this issue?
Well, you know, it's interesting because when we signed the heartbeat bill years ago, that was litigated under Florida's state constitution because we had 40 years of really, really bad jurisprudence that were hostile, way more hostile to right to life than Roe and Casey were even at the federal level. So that was being litigated, and in I think it was like April of 2024, the Supreme Court in Florida ruled and upheld the heartbeat bill, which we anticipated. We were hopeful, but you never know how these courts came out. And so that was a day where a lot of folks who believe in right to life were happy with that decision. The problem is, later that day or simultaneously, the court passes judgment on this ballot language. They voted to approve the Amendment 4 language to go on the ballot. And so just as we had a victory in having that heartbeat legislation upheld, we knew immediately that could be wiped away with this ballot initiative. And part of it is this was one of the most extreme that we've seen around the country because, yes, it was abortion till birth. It also eliminated parental consent for minors and even said that a physician does not have to be the one performing the abortion. And I don't know if that was intentional, if that was just poor draftsmanship. So it was really a crazy thing. And actually, some of the polling had it at 70%. There were polling that just when you read the language, Republicans were approving of it by 62% initially. And the abortion lobby ended up pouring in $120 million into this. And so I'd say 90% of the Republican pro-life elected officials in Florida, you know, they were just like, peace out. I'm not getting into that buzzsaw, right? And you burn capital, and it's an uphill battle. But for me, it's like, look, you only get one shot at going through this thing, you know, whether it's life, being governor, whatever. Are you going to use the platform that you have, the talents that you have, to stand up for what's right, or are you just going to duck and cover? And so for me, and remember, a year ago, like, you know, Republicans did so poorly in the midterms in 22, they all blamed right to life. They all blame Dobbs, even though I won the biggest victory in the history of the state of Florida for a Republican the same year. That's inconvenient for them. They don't like to mention that as a pro-life candidate. But that was like everyone in the political class saying, oh, you got to run and hide, right? Republicans got to run and hide. You're going to lose. You're going to lose. So we basically said, and I didn't necessarily agree with that, but I didn't know. Quite frankly, I didn't care. We had to fight this fight because I knew if we lost on Amendment 4, that was basically the end of the pro-life movement, not just in Florida, but I think throughout the country. Because if you have the leading Republican state can't defeat this ballot initiative, then how are you going to be able to win any of these battles around? So I just think it's like you're called upon to do what's right. You got to do what you believe. This was not something that was good for the state of Florida. And the reality is, just since November, had that gone into effect, I mean, we've had thousands and thousands of lives saved as a result of the heartbeat bill just since then that would not have been saved. So it was the right thing to do. It was a very, very difficult fight. And at the same time, the court put on the abortion language. They also put on Amendment 3, which was weed anywhere in Florida, put forward by one corporation that gave itself liability. That's not necessarily related to right to life, but it made the challenge more difficult because, I have people who supported me, who are pro-life, who want weed. And on the flip side, I've got people that hate weed, but they don't want pro-life legislation. So it's like, you've got to manage this like coalition to be able to beat both of these. And the combined spend for both of those amendments, $275 million to try to pass both of those. 150 for weed, 125 for Amendment 4. So this is difficult. And, the thing that's frustrating is like, we had people that were very pro-life, because you do like focus groups. Pro-life voters would read that language, and some of them didn't realize how radical it was. And that's by design. They're not drafting language to illuminate or to educate. They're doing it to obfuscate. They want people to vote for it who really wouldn't believe if they knew the meaning. So there's an art to that. They spent a lot of money getting into it. So, it was, most people said you guys don't have a chance, but we dug in and got it done.
Well, and you mentioned absolutely. You mentioned over $250 million came into the state of Florida to drive these two ballot initiatives. And you also mentioned some of the misleading language. In fact, the ballot initiative was titled An Amendment to Stop Government Interference. So they're targeting people who are small government conservatives, trying to fool them and deceive them. And so you had this incredible uphill climb, but you did some really innovative things in terms of explaining to the voters, here's precisely what this amendment is going to do. And you talked about the cost that the amendment would impose on the people of Florida. Talk a little bit about how you started from this ground level of, hey, this is like going to pass with 65 to 70%. It's deceiving voters. How did you turn the tide? What are some practical things that you all did here in Florida to turn the tide? Because ultimately this thing failed, and it wasn't even, it was 57%, so it was well below 60%. How did you turn that tide?
Yeah, and honestly, we knew going into election it was going to fail, and we actually had it worse than 57. So we were a little surprised it even reached 57. But, well, a couple things we did. One, we had to raise resources, and I wasn't like the only one doing. There's a lot of people involved in that, but we knew you're going to be outgunned, right? And so we went to a lot of people. The problem is like, the business community doesn't want to touch this issue. A lot of the big donors in like Florida, for example, a lot of them have New York ties. They're more liberal on these issues or don't want to be involved. So we only had a hand. I mean, ADF folks were helpful to us. We probably have people in this room that helped contribute. Focus on the Family was helpful. The Catholic Church was helpful. Some of these other pro-life groups, like, you couldn't find them in Florida if you had a search warrant. They just didn't want to get in the game. That's fine. I mean, it is what it is. And so you had to do that. So that was really scrapping. Then I went on the road. Look, I have a platform. If I show up, the cameras come. And so I was hosting events around the state, September, October, into the first week in November, and I'd have physicians up there saying how crazy this was. I'd have parents saying, don't take away my parental rights. And basically, we were looking at people that were dyed-in-the-wool pro-life were going to be with us. There were some people who may not agreed with the heartbeat bill, but definitely thought this amendment was went too far. So we had to get them to say, this isn't about, whatever legislation is in Florida, because you can elect people to change if you want, but you have to stop putting this in the Constitution. So it was a more nuanced argument, because that's what the electorate we had to contend with, and so we did that. And then one of the things that was really harmful, so the Florida legislature did the heartbeat bill. None of the things that the media will say, an ectopic pregnancy, all this stuff, like all of that is excluded from the heartbeat protections. First of all, that wouldn't even be an abortion if somebody has a miscarriage or anything like that. But they were running these ads basically trying to say, and they were sly about it, because they would say, well, because of this anti-abortion, and they wouldn't even say it's Florida's legislation. These are people, I don't even know where these people were from. They may have been actors, but and they're saying, oh, I was forced to do this, I'm forced to do that, and all this, which wasn't true. So we used our public service, some of our public service money in Department of Health and our Agency for Healthcare Administration to run public service announcements. Now, we weren't saying vote yes or no on Amendment 4 because, maybe that would have been appropriate with public. We didn't even want to go. All we want to do is inform and say, hey, you're hearing this. This is not true. And we had a justification for doing that, because if you're telling women they can't get health care in Florida if they're having a miscarriage, that's a lie. That is a brazen lie. And so we were able to put that out there and at least educate folks that, hey, people are lying to you for this. And I think there was a immediate health reason to do it, because I do think people were under the misimpression that somehow this legislation was doing things that it wasn't. So you had basically $120 million of lies. You had the media. The media is not going to help you on this issue, 100% no. And so you had that. So we had to use every lever at our disposal to be able to get the message out. And it started with over 60% of Republicans in favor of Amendment 4. By the time the election it was like 75% of Republicans voted against it. And honestly, we got about 15 to 18% of Democrats ended up voting against Amendment 4.
That's an incredible result, and just stunning in how that turnaround happened. And I want to kind of shift focus, because you mentioned combating the lies and the amount of money that was spent to propagate lies to the people of Florida about this amendment. And the theme of our conference this year is contending for truth, the necessity of actively contending for truth. And we've seen over the past couple of years, people say, hey, now's not the right time. Now's just not the right time to take on the life issue. It's just not popular enough. And yet you have made the decision over and over again to put a stake in the ground and to contend for truth. And we've also seen a very recent, what people are calling the vibe shift, right? The 2024 election, a lot of conservatives, I think, are tempted to say, well, hey, all the problems are solved. We won the 2024 election. We can pack up our bags and go home. I just want to get your thoughts on that. Is it time for the conservative movement to pack up its bags, declare victory, and leave the field? Or is there more work to do to contend for truth in our time?
Well, I think now more than ever, we need people standing for truth, because what's out there is really a blizzard of lies each and every day. And as much as I want to say the lies are only on the left or with corporate media, you've got people ostensibly on the right who monetize lies and fake narratives too. I mean, that's just so much of what's out there is crap. And so who's going to stand for something that is true and just? And I think the way you do that is you got to have the foundation of faith in God, what it means to be an American, the founding principles of this country, all these things that just transcend any given moment in time and that are enduring. And if you have that, you the foundation, I think, to be able to navigate the nonsense. I think if you're just flailing out there, you got into political sphere just because you think it's fun or you wanted to do this or that, and you don't really have a core foundation of why you're doing this, man, you're just going to twist in the wind. And of course, you're going to run for cover when things get hot. But I will tell you this, in Florida, not one representative in the House or Florida Senate has lost election because of voting for the heartbeat bill. Not one has lost election over 2 different election cycles. So, if you poll people, in the Florida, what's support for heartbeat bill depends on how you phrase it. If I phrase it positively, I can get a very good result. If I phrase it negatively, it'll get a poor. If I phrase it neutral, I don't know if it hits 50% here. But quite frankly, does doing what's right depend on whether something's 55 or 45? I mean, I can't do, things I don't believe in, and I've got to stand for the things I know are right, regardless of what happens. And the thing you notice in this, and we dealt with me, because I remember you guys came down and did something during COVID here. Most of what I was doing in COVID, now everyone says, oh yeah, Florida was so great. I had almost nobody supporting me. No Republicans wanted to speak in favor of what I was doing. They all were lining up with Fauci. They said, oh, your governor's crazy to open schools. He's crazy to do this, crazy to do that. And so that was me into the teeth. I had supermajorities of Republicans that thought I was wrong at the outset. And so the question is does that cause you to just kind of cower and not do? People's livelihoods were at stake. People's businesses were at stake, their freedom. I had to do an executive order to make sure that churches could operate because I had local governments that wanted to stop people from going to church. So it was a crazy time, and it's like, all right, here I stand. I've got to do what's right, but I'm confident that if you're standing on principle and doing what's right, that eventually the winds come in your direction, and that happened. 6-9 months later, the whole world was coming to Florida. Everyone was looking to Florida. So I think on these issues, you gotta be on the side of standing for what's true, what's enduring. And yes, there's going to be fickleness in public opinion polling. You'll have some political leaders that will be there or not be there depending on. I get that. But it's never the wrong time to do the right thing. So there's a lot of battles that need to be fought. And what I see in Republican circles as an elected Republican, what I see in some of the judges that have been put on courts by Republicans, it's very easy to be against the administrative state's overreach, and we are. It's very easy to be for lower taxes, and we are. But when the culture's at stake, there's some people that don't like to fight on culture. When we did women's sports, we were hit because I did it 5 years ago, right, to protect women's sports. We were pilloried for that. When we stood up against Disney, to make sure that we didn't have gender ideology in our schools. I was getting hammered for that. Now that's kind of all come, full circle to where, no one wants to be attached to woke or some of this other stuff. But in the moment, a lot of times these things, there could be some blowback. But there's a lot more. So in Florida, we've really worked hard to say we're not going to let the left take over universities, K-12 education, corporate America, all this stuff. And we've had a lot of success. But politics goes back and forth. As bad as the Dems are, they will eventually rebound. That's just the way it works. And the left is never going to quit. All right, they're never going to quit. I think in Florida, we've shown how you can't just win a superficial policy battle. You got to take ground. You got to make sure these institutions are healthy. And I think that's going to be the fight going forward across the country to make sure that our institutions are healthy, because there was a time in this country where you may disagree on a policy, but our basic institutions were sound. That's really changed in the last 10, 15 years. Florida, I think, is the big course correction at the state level. Then I think after 2024, you're seeing movement on that nationally, but there are a lot of battles ahead. And I just think that you've got to be standing for what's right on these core issues that are not a moment in time about what policy would be, but are really about enduring truth.
So, Governor, looking ahead, the pro-life movement obviously is always trying to find its footing here, and this is such an interesting time for the pro-life movement. Tell us a little bit about what Florida has done, not just to defeat Amendment 4, but some of the creative ways that you have come alongside women who are in moments of crisis where they need that support. And Florida has really been a leader, a signal leader, in supporting women who find themselves in tough situations, allowing them to make good choices to welcome babies into the world. So talk a little bit about some of the innovative things you've done here in Florida to really provide for those incentives and provide for the pathway for women to welcome babies into the world?
Yeah, I mean, look, we want to be pro-life after birth, right? I mean, we want to make sure that these babies that are born, sometimes in difficult circumstances, that the mothers and hopefully the fathers, but honestly, that's been more difficult, to have the fathers there on some of these in some of these situations. We have worked on that. We want to make sure that they have a pathway for self-sufficiency and for success. And when I became governor, we recognized that bureaucracies are not going to be the answer to this. Bureaucracies perhaps can provide some assistance, but a lot of times they end up being counterproductive. And you look at like the war on poverty that was launched in the 60s, it ended up making poverty more endemic because it was creating a culture of dependency. So we said, okay, the bureaucracies aren't the answer. Where is the answer? The answer is in our communities, particularly in our faith-based institutions. So I welcome our churches and synagogues into the fold in my administration from day one. And that's eventually evolved into my wife, our First Lady, Casey's initiative called Hope Florida, which all Hope Florida does, it hasn't cost the state of Florida a dime. We take the existing infrastructure of these agencies, starting with children and families, because obviously the mothers with young kids are our primary focus that we want to do. And what we've recognized is, okay, instead of your job as a bureaucrat, just give somebody a check and have them come back, we want to transform you into a navigator who's linked in with all these other resources in your community. So we use something called Care Portal, where churches that want to participate, charities that want to participate, businesses, even individuals are into the portal. So if you have a mom who maybe has 2 young kids, maybe she gets evicted from her apartment, she has nowhere to go, you can go to Children and Families. You'll be met by a navigator. That information will be put in the portal. And guess what? The church now has that information. Who do you think is going to do a better job of caring for that person and getting that mother on a pathway? Obviously, these institutions. And so since that's been in effect, we've been able to eliminate or reduce dependency on government by over 30,000 Floridians. And it's saved taxpayers $106 million, which is nice. But much more important than us just saving money, and look, we have, we've got budget surpluses, we've got no income tax. I've paid down half of Florida's debt for all 180 years of its history just on my watch. So we're doing fine. I mean, it's not like, we're always looking to do better financially, but that's not really the most important part of this. The most important part of this is you've given these folks some hope, because what do these folks see? There's somebody out there that cares about you. There's somebody out there that's taking an interest in your success and your children's success. And so we've now modeled this to where it's not just Department of Children and Families, it's elder affairs, it's veterans. Now, we're not the main node for veterans. That's federal in terms of going to the VA. But just think about it. You have volunteers who can be on, hooked into the portal, and maybe a veteran just having a tough time. Somebody volunteers, hey, I'm going to come take you to lunch. I just want to thank you for what you're doing. That could be the difference between that person not committing suicide because somebody cares about them. So what we believe in Florida is harnessing the great resources we have in our community, and some of it's financial, but a lot of it is just sweat equity and people that care, and that really starts with our faith-based institutions. And so I think it's been a model for the country. I think that's really the only pathway we have to liberate ourselves from these bureaucracies. And when you have the bureaucracies in control, they are going to pursue certain ways that people in this room are not going to agree with. And so why would we want to put our destiny in the hands of that to begin with? But ultimately, that's the solution. And I don't think, and we've had a lot of states come and study this. A lot of states have been impressed with the results. But it's interesting, some of these deep blue states, once they find out that we're enlisting the churches, they're out. They just won't go there. And that's kind of a sad commentary on some of these blue states, that they would not want to accept help from these faith-based institutions that are so willing and able to do it. So that's ultimately the solution.
So last question. You've talked a little bit about standing even against polls that are a little bit negative. And you've cultivated that all throughout your time as governor of Florida, from the COVID epidemic, standing against Amendment 4. And we had Rod Dreher earlier this week, who wrote the book Live Not by Lies. And he talked about the importance of standing for truth, even in a culture that overwhelmingly is accepting lies, and standing with courage and being willing to suffer for that stand. And I think you, amongst all of our politicians, have really exhibited that virtue. So tell us a little bit. Absolutely, yeah. How would you cultivate that, and how do we cultivate that? And tell us about the importance of cultivating that virtue of standing with fortitude, even when it looks like the world's against us.
Well, my first day as governor, I sat at the desk. It was all empty, and I just looked around the office, and I told myself, I don't know what SOB is going to succeed me, but they are not going to have anything to do because I'm getting all the meat off the bone. I am going to use my office and my platform to be able to tackle issues, and that means leaning into issues. Now, you think like in 2022, I won the biggest election that any Republican for governor has ever done in Florida history, but I will tell you, I could have done even better had I trimmed my sails on some stuff because, you use capital. When you're running into these fights, fighting Amendment 4, that costs me capital. Fighting against Amendment 3 costs me capital. Signing heartbeat bills, that cost me a lot of capital. I had a lot of people that were very supportive of me that said they're out if I go through with that, and of course I did. And so it's just the situation of you only have a limited amount of time. You only have a limited amount of time to make a difference. Use that. Use the capital that you have to be able to say, you never want to look in the mirror later in life and just be like, man, Amendment 4 in Florida has cost all these lives. I wish I would have gotten off my rump and done something about it. I really wish I would have done it. No regrets. You've got to go in. You got to run towards these fires, and you got to fight these fights. And honestly, yes, it takes some political courage, but the way I always think about it is it's like, we're going to have our 250th anniversary next July 4th from the adoption of the Declaration of Independence. That took courage because those delegates who signed that declaration, they were all successful. They were all relatively wealthy for the time. They were movers and shakers. They had a lot to lose. They pledged lives, fortunes, and sacred honor. Had they not won that fight, they all would have been put to death. 100% of them would have been put to death. And so they made that really an entrepreneurial act that put themselves at great risk. We have people that we celebrate who serve in the military. There are people that I served with when I was over on active duty in Iraq who've gone above and beyond the call of duty, given their lives, and then some have done everything that normally would cause you to give your life, but somehow they come out and they live to tell about it. That takes, really sacrifice and courage. What we're asked to do, people are going to lie about you, they're going to smear you, they're going to attack you, they're going to do all that. But what I've found, and I think my tenure here in Florida is a good example of that, if it was just about what the media said about you and all that, there's no way I could have gotten elected twice here. Literally, I was public enemy number one for the Democratic Party, all this stuff, but people respond. So what that tells me is there is a hunger for truth out there. It's not always apparent. All these other worldly influencers can do all they can to try to discourage that, to try to camouflage the truth, have people get off track. But when you're there and you're consistent and people see you're willing to fight for what you believe in, when people see you're willing to fight for them because you're standing on this principle, when you do that against the wind, they will always remember you for doing that because everyone knows so many of these politicians are fickle. When the wind's at your back, oh yeah, we got people come out of the woodworks. They'll get out there, they'll do all that. But when the wind's in your face, then are you going to be somebody that's going to go out there, take the incoming, and plant that flag in the ground and say, I'm going to do what's right. So I think it's something that ultimately pays off. I think so much of politics is short-term thinking that people see, well, if I do this, I'm going to get attacked. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. That's fleeting. Whatever happens, a news cycle is fleeting. Stay true to principle. Have that solid foundation. Speak the truth. Stand for truth. And eventually, I do believe things will swing your way. We have an opportunity now in this country, where we were 3 or 4 years ago with some of the madness that was taking hold around the country. You've seen a very positive shift. But that positive shift isn't guaranteed to last. That could be fleeting too. It really depends on good people doing the right thing when it counts. And so I know the folks that have supported this organization aren't afraid to do that. I wish more organizations on the right were as effective and as committed to principle as you guys are here. So thank you.
Folks, I wish we could talk all day, but talking about good people willing to do the right thing when it counts, Governor Ron DeSantis. Thank you for being
Thank you. God bless.